Alright, amidst all of the castorice drama, I thought why not at least bring one positive into the light. The positive being that we're going to be entering a quantum meta. It's been a while since we've been in a quantum meta. Honestly, the last time we've been in a quantum meta was the release of Silver Wolf. And that was almost like 2 years ago. That was like 1.1, right? We haven't had a quantum meta since the arrival of Silver Wolf. And in today's video, we're going to be breaking down everything you need to know to prepare for the upcoming quantum meta. Of course, for those of you that do still care about the game, again, quantum meta is when I usually have the most enjoyment playing Honkai Star Rail. So for me, this is great. For you, those of you that are obviously very upset about the situation going on in Honkai Star Rail, I can understand you not playing. And for those of you that are skipping the character, because I'm going to be honest, real quick, I'm going to be honest. I truly do believe castorice is not going to be changed. Like, the character is going to have that global passive revive. I don't see that being away from the character's kit. Now, hey, everything is subject to change, but this is just my honest opinion, honest interpretation on the whole situation. So I'm taking that into consideration when it comes to today's video. But again, I could completely understand for those of you that just don't want to play the game right now because you are discontent with the latest iterations and how the direction of the game is going. I completely understand. You are valid for how you feel. Now, for those of you that do care about the upcoming meta for quantum characters, I thought why not just take each character one by one, and there will be a lot of pauses in this video, just because this is obviously not scripted, right? I mean, I did this again, man. I gotta get out of this specific location. I've done this specific location in the past like 3-4 videos on the channel, and also I'm not doing another Microsoft Paint thing, because that's typically what I do whenever I talk about quantum characters. It's been like this since day one. I don't want to do that just because I want to say that for another video. And if I was to do that today, it would take honestly, believe it or not, me like individually painting out and writing everything on the Microsoft Paint Studio takes forever. Like, it might seem like it doesn't take a lot of time. It takes forever because my handwriting is absolutely abysmal. You probably obviously already know that. Anyways, the biggest understanding, or the biggest kind of telltale that we are going to be in a quantum meta, is because of the release of Tribbie. If you don't know Tribbie is a character of the Harmony element that has a ton of AoE damage, additional damage procs, which is a new kind of thing to Honkai Star. I want to say Robin has additional damage, right, with her ultimate. Who else does additional damage? I can't really think of any other characters top of my head. Maybe not Ruan Mei. You get that after breaking the enemy. But you get additional damage with Tribbie after you do damage on the enemies that had the ultimate from Tribbie, right? So Tribbie uses her ultimate. You do additional damage to any enemy you attack. So any character that has AoE benefits even more from the additional damage that Tribbie does do. And for those of you that are interested in Tribbie, of course, this damage becomes even amplified further with the first Eidolon, which I'm probably not going to get because I'm trying to save everything for castorice, right? She's going to be the center of the quantum meta, right? So saving for the DPS sounds like the best thing to me. If I go for E1 now, I'm not going to have many pools for castorice, and then I would potentially have to spend money. The upcoming quantum meta, Tribbie is going to be the best Harmony character you can use in this current meta. Now, this is excluding potential buffs for quantum characters in the upcoming patches, because we did get the reveal, or the, not reveal, but the quote-unquote, like, hint that characters were getting buffed in the future iterations of Honkai Star Rail. So, with there being quantum meta, it's very obvious that they're going to be buffing the quantum characters first. So I definitely do expect Seele to receive some kind of buff. And honestly, this character has been pretty decent to use right now in the Memory of Chaos last stage. Obviously, the enemies have a ton of HP, but if you do use this character in a zero cycle team, she feels pretty decent to play with right now because the enemies are weak to quantum, and she just deals quite a bit of damage, especially with Tribbie into the mix, reducing the resistance of those specific enemies, which we'll talk about the importance of the resistance pen that Tribbie does give and how important that is for castorice as well, who also does have her resistance pen, spoiler, right? Now, as for the buffs potentially that they would give to the quantum characters such as Seele and everything, it's going to be a buff that would essentially make her viable but not make her better than castorice, right? Castorice is obviously going to be the anniversary character. So if I had to give any guess as to what the buffs could be for Seal, I would assume that it has something to do with her action mechanic, right? So let's say she kills an enemy and then she gets the additional turn. Well, being able to kill the enemy or killing the enemy now is extremely hard because enemies have a ton of HP. So I definitely do see there being some type of buff to that mechanic to where if you kill the enemy, right? Because when this character gets resets, she is pretty good with damage. The problem is she just is hard to get resets with. Those resets she gets does actually end up spiraling because you get more energy after you take more turns, and then you have another buffer giving you additional turns, which does help with getting that extra damage in, right? But the issue with the character is that she hasn't been able to get those additional turns because the enemies have had a ton of HP, and her multipliers are not high enough to justify her being a single target damage dealer in the current meta, right? If we compare this multiplier that she hits on one enemy to a character that has AoE attacks like Rappa, who I don't have maxed out. Well, Rappa doesn't really show, right? Because she's a break character. I would have to do Jinglu. Jinglu's not maxed out. Well, let's do this for instance, right? Jinglu doing this amount of damage and then the adjacent damage, right? So if we add the 250% to the 125, this ends up being 500 damage, 500%, right? That Jinglu is doing. That multiplier is higher than Seal, and that's just Seal's ultimate, by the way. Now, this character does get additional turns, so that's something to take into consideration for her overall damage, and it is a lot harder to calculate than other DPS characters. What I'm trying to say is the biggest buff that this character could get is making that additional turn a lot easier to achieve. And the only way of being able to do that is by making the criteria of getting an additional turn either lower, so you're not necessarily having to kill the enemy, but maybe getting the enemy to like half HP or getting the enemy to 75% HP, and then you get the additional turn so you can finish off those targets. Or giving the character a straight up multiplier buff, which I personally don't see them doing. Now, if they were to do both, give her a multiplier buff and buff the fact that she would get the requirement or criteria for getting the additional turn would be phenomenal. That'd be amazing. In my opinion, that's all the character really needs. Maybe buffs to her Eidolons too would be nice, but I'm not really expecting this. Probably a buff to her E6 though. I definitely see a buff to this at some point. That's all the character would really need in order to come back into the meta. Because right now, the game is just a stat check, and her stats aren't really enough to keep up with non-zero cycle teams, right? Now, as for another character like Silverwolf, who is going to be the worst character in the current upcoming Quantum meta. The reason being is because the current meta for Honkai Star Rail is centered around AoE characters. And obviously, Silverwolf being a single target debuffer, right? Imagine saying a single target debuffer in the current iteration of Honkai Star Rail. You wouldn't believe that this is the actual character that exists. Yeah, she sucks. Because there's so many enemies in the game, so many enemies need the resist shred, so many enemies need the defense shred, so many enemies need the debuffs. This character just doesn't work in the current game. There's just too many enemies. So before in Honkai Star Rail, you would have 3 enemies. You would have a boss and 2 elites, or you have like 2 elite and then like 2 smaller mobs. And the best thing about Silverwolf at that point in time is that Silverwolf was able to put the quantum weakness, or whatever weakness you decided you wanted to put into the enemy, on that elite enemy, and that allows you to pretty much dish out the bulk of your damage against that specific enemy. And then you would just essentially kill the boss enemy first with Silverwolf, and then if you had Seal or you had QQ, your splash damage or your extra turn damage would just kill those secondary enemies, right? Those mobs, if you will. Well, now Honkai Star Rail isn't really centered around that anymore. There is a lot more bossing enemies in the end game, and enemies overall just have more deployable mobs, which means that Silverwolf's value just innately becomes lower and lower and lower, especially taking into consideration one of the best characters she worked with was Acheron, who already has very strong characters that work alongside her with her, like JQ, right? For instance, doing literally what Silverwolf wants to do, right? Just AoE. And then you have other buffers or a debuffer as well, like Pela you could use, who works better than Silverwolf because of how much AoE content is in the game currently. Silverwolf just needs a way to essentially spread that defense break and resistance pen and the quantum weakness or whatever weakness from that singular enemy to the other enemies. And I had a great idea for potential buffs this character could have. So, if Sir Wolf planted the initial quantum weakness, in this case because it's quantum meta, initial quantum weakness onto the specific enemy she used it on, and let's say you killed that enemy, what would happen then is that weakness, right, would spread onto the other targets alongside the debuffs that she implanted on that specific enemy as well. So let's say you implanted quantum weakness, you implanted the defense down, you implanted the secondary defense down with her trace, right, because she has 2 sources of defense down, and you also implemented just other debuffs overall. Like maybe you have her signature light cone, so you give the vulnerability debuff on the enemy as well. Well, if you kill that target, she spreads those debuffs to other targets on the field, which would make her a lot better as a buffer offensive debuffing support in the current meta of the game, right? Especially with the current contents centered around pretty much needing to have characters that can constantly dish out large amounts of AoE damage because of the amount of mobs in the game, right? She'll be a lot better. And I think that is a fair way to make the character. For one, it's very skillful. You have to prioritize which target you're going to debuff, and you have a clear trade-off for that, right? If you don't kill that initial target, you don't get those debuffs spread to the other targets. I think that is a very fair way to balance the character, and I think making her blast would be a very big mistake in my honest opinion. I don't think this character should be a blast character. If they make her blast, then so be it. It will still be a buff for the character, but I do think making her a character with the skill cap she used to have back then, allowing her to pretty much just enabling her in that niche, right? And allowing her to retain that skillful factor of the character and not giving her the skillful factors will be a missed opportunity from Hoyoverse here, in my opinion at least. And that's just how I would essentially buff the character. And it is cool, right? Think of the debuffs that she does spread to the enemies after killing the initial target as a virus, which is very in character for Sir Wolf anyways, right? Because that is just what the character is known for. She's a hacker. Now, that's just the easiest way of buffing the character. And if they were to do that, because her values are already really high, she is still the highest defense shredder in the game. It's just that she only does it for a single target. And she implants weakness, which is very valuable. It's just only single target. That would be the easiest way of buffing a character. And I don't even think you need to touch her Eidolons because her Eidolons are already really freaking good. They're really good. I don't see them doing anything with her Eidolons. They're still really good. But yeah, since the current meta is centered around AoE characters, and let's say hypothetically they do not buff Sir Wolf in the upcoming patches, this character has no place in the current meta, so she's just not going to be a character you should use alongside Castorice and Tribbie. Now it leaves us with the 2 other quantum characters, Sparkle and xuan. The interesting thing about Sparkle is that all this character really needed was to be able to buff HP scaling characters. That would make her really valuable in the upcoming quantum meta, and just meta in general because of characters like Maide, right? She would just be a lot better. The problem is she just doesn't buff HP scalers in any capacity aside from the ultimate buffs, but that's it. That's really all there is to it. She used to give a 54% damage boost to quantum characters way back when. She just doesn't do that anymore. She gives an attack boost to attack quantum characters. That's it. Castorice and Tribbie are HP scaling characters. If they were to change this character, make her give damage buffs instead of attack boost, that's really all you need to do for this character. She has in my opinion, the best harmony Eidolons in the game, aside from Tribbie. She's already a really strong character. Defense, right? Ignore on her Eidolon 2. Her first Eidolon gives even more attack, which I think they should change. And I think they should change that to damage percent. Give this character more damage percent on the Eidolon 1. You might be questioning, why would you give a character so much damage percent in their kit if that is going to dilute the stats of other characters? Because maybe some characters already get a ton of damage percent. Like, for instance, Seele, right? And QQ is another example, right? QQ with her skill, right? Constantly using her skill, get the J tiles, you get more damage percent. Well, on those specific characters, if you have too much damage percent, it would be in your best interest to give those characters attack boosting spears as a form of less damage, right? Percentage, because you're already getting that damage percentage source from Sparkle. And it is just a lot better to have to farm those instead of farming quantum damage boost spheres, which are a lot harder to drop and typically don't have the stats you're wanting unless you do craft those specific pieces, and you can use those same crafting resources on other pieces that are more important. Like, for instance, right now in the current meta, I'm thinking about crafting a energy regeneration rate rope for Tribbie, and that piece has like speed, crit rate, crit damage, and HP. Like that's essentially what a piece of gear I want. Or a energy regeneration rate link rope for xuan for faster ultimates, and that be on the current new set, which we'll get into in just a moment. But anyways, beside the point, that is the easiest way of buffing Sparkle, is just giving her those damage buffs back, and now allow her to be in the current meta alongside Tribbie and castorice as a buffer, right? Just right now, Sunday is just better overall because he does boost the summons as well, and she doesn't boost the summons. But I don't think that is that's not the deterring factor of using Sparkle on the current meta. It's just that she doesn't buff the characters. She just doesn't buff them, aside from crit damage. And that leaves us with xuan, who I think is the current best quantum character in the game right now. Right, hands down. This character is still really freaking good because she has a niche that no other characters currently have in the game, and that is just straight up fat damage mitigation. Extremely fat damage mitigation. Super valuable. She also gives a ton of crit rate to the team, which is very, very nice. Very nice for the upcoming current quantum characters where you're going to want a ton of crit rate on, right? Because there's going to be multiple damage dealers in the team, right? Tribbie, for instance. Castorice, for instance, right? xuan is going to be a very nice support to just have overall with the quantum characters. I don't see that really changing. I definitely do believe we will get a better quantum support for the team, right? Probably Hyacine, right? If I'm saying her name right, most likely is going to be the quantum support for the team. That is a lot better to use than xuan. Who knows? Maybe you could use both together and they'll work well, right? I do also want to take into consideration that the revive that castorice is going to give is going to be very valuable for xuan, right? Especially if you are a player that is looking to have a xuan with more damage in the current meta, right? Just because there is a lot of quantum enemies on the field, it's not that bad to have xuan do more damage, right? I'm a little bit congested here because allergies, right? Especially when I talk for too long. If I talk for too long, I notice that I get more congested because allergies. Anyways, xuan is really nice with the newest planar set. This set gives her a ton of HP, and it gives her a ton of extra crit damage. She's obviously going to meet that HP requirement because it's very, very easy. But these two stats makes her really, really good. Now, I do want to preface and say that this over the other set, which does give crit damage to the whole team, maybe that's more valuable for your account and your teams that you do use her in, and you do you, right? But I've noticed that this set is just super valuable for this character for the DPS build, especially with the current meta now, with there being a lot of quantum weak enemies, right, in the end game, because of Tribbie and then castorice next patch. It feels really freaking good, especially with the res pen that Tribbie does give. Feels really freaking good. And then the 4-piece quantum is just very nice for the character. You just deal even more quantum damage. Obviously, with mine being E6, it's just a lot easier to build her this way. But with the revive, which I was trying to preface before, the revive that castorice gives makes it to where you have a E2 xuan without pulling for an E2 xuan, right? And what makes that really nice is that you're able to build her as a sub DPS without having to worry about her solo sustain potential, because you have the revive in case anything was to happen to this character during the battle. This is assuming they do keep the castorice revive in castorice's kit. If they remove castorice's revive, then obviously everything I'm saying is going to go out the window, and you should just keep her as the build you probably already currently have. Because right now, she can benefit from having damage in the current meta. Only time will tell, though, especially with Tribbie contributing to increasing the overall damage, right, with the res pen. It's just super valuable. It's just super valuable. Now, one more thing to take into consideration is that castorice does buff your character's damage, which means that your xuan will have more sources of damage buffing. Also very nice. Now, my Tribbie currently uses Dance to Dance. And Dance to Dance is very good because you get more actions. Definitely one of the best light cones in the game, bar none, right? I'm thinking about moving her over to a Planetary Rendezvous light cone, just because I want to see how that's going to fare with the current quantum character. Like, if I have a full team of quantum characters, right? castorice, xuan, hyacinth whenever she comes out, tribbie, right? And I give tribbie the Clinton Rendezvous, you're giving a ton of damage bonus to the team, right? Like 96% just across the board for everybody, right? That is a lot of free damage percent. Very nice. Now I'm wondering how it's going to fit with the current quantum team. We'll see what that ends up being, but I'll just wait, of course, whenever that does roll around. I do still use her Dance and Dance because it's so good. The action forwarding is so good. Now, the last thing I want to mention about Fu Xuan is that she doesn't really need any buffs in my opinion. I wouldn't buff this character. I'll be honest. I wouldn't buff her. She's fine. She doesn't need any buffs. The best thing for her is making more quantum characters more relevant, just because she fits very well with quantum characters. I don't see there really being a need to buff her. Obviously, when a new quantum support does come out, her value will drop ever so slightly, because the quantum character will be more valued alongside the other quantum characters. But I just don't see any universe where this character is bad, right? She's just still really good. She's honestly probably the most well-aged character from the first year of Honkai Star, if I'm being honest. That's just my opinion, though. Last thing I will mention about Fu Xuan is that if she does have a rerun, which I'm not expecting it, but let's say she did. I mean, well, hey, they've done the banner thing, right? Where they've had 6 limited characters on like divided up into like 2-bit. Like, maybe that happens. Maybe she has a rerun. I personally would not pull for any Eidolons for this character just because the Eidolon 1 isn't as valued as it used to be. It's still nice, right? 30% crit damage. But pulling for Eidolons nowadays is just not good for accounts overall, just because of the amount of power creep in the game. Like back then, pulling for that was fine, right? Because the power creep levels wasn't as bad as it is now. But pulling for Eidolons on a rerun character, if you're a meta player, just isn't a good idea in general. So I just wouldn't do it if I were you. Now, the biggest letdown for the upcoming quantum meta, in my honest opinion, was making the newest quantum characters a lot better with the newer set. Now, for tribbie, I use her with the quantum set just because it's very valuable. It gives the character a ton of extra damage whenever the enemies are weak to quantum. But because the character already has innate res pen, it's not even like you really need this character to have the quantum set, because you're going to be fighting enemies that don't have quantum weakness. So, and that's because you have the res pen, so it's just valuable in the character. You don't need to have her in the quantum set because you're not going to be really, like, you're not going to only just use her in against enemies that are weak to quantum, right? So having her on the newest set is more beneficial than having her on the quantum set. But if you do have quantum pieces laying around, it's not like you need to farm the newest set for tribbie. Just, it depends on how good your pieces are, right? Like if you have pieces with a lot of crit damage, HP, so on and so forth, it is hard to build a character like this. It takes time. But if you do have extra pieces laying around, you can use those on her. Now, as for castorice, the worst part about castorice is that if you have paid attention to relics in Honkai Star, or at least relics nowadays, and even light cones too, which we'll tackle in just a second, the current relics and light cones for Honkai Star have been extremely niche. So the newest planar set requires your, like, this set buffs the crit damage of your memo sprite, which means that if you like, let's say you are a character that does have a memo sprite, excuse me, but the set does not, like, it doesn't say it buffs your memo sprite damage, you are not going to get that buff. The quantum damage, right, and the ignore pen is not going to work on the summon from castorice, which means you're losing out on a ton of extra defense pen. Right? You're losing out on all of this, which is the worst thing they could have done for characters, in my opinion. This is the dumbest thing that they could have done for characters. It is the most disheartening thing they could have done for characters. So, you have to farm the newest set for castorice because that set buffs your Memor Sprite damage. This set doesn't buff your Memor Sprite damage, which again is the biggest letdown I've ever seen. When I found out this, I was very disappointed, because if you were like me and you had a ton of quantum pieces laying around, right? Especially pieces from your seal that you probably don't use anymore, you could have used this set on castorice, and you could have gotten very nice value with her. Obviously, you're going to need HP percent instead of attack percent, but you get the memo, right? If you had a ton of crit stats, you could have just used the crit pieces on your castorice. But that's just not the case anymore because of the fact that they decided to lock the Member Sprite damage buffs behind the new sets. And this is even amplified further with the newest Battle Pass light code, for those of you that are not aware. This one right here buffs your Member Sprite damage. If it doesn't say buff your Member Sprite damage, you're not getting that buff for your summon. Very, very, very disheartening. So obviously, since I already had Battle Pass, this is the light code I'm going to be using, castorice. There isn't really many options to use on the characters, either this or her signature, as far as I'm concerned, and there's probably 3-star light cones you can use. Very disheartening. Maybe they'll come up with an event light cone that you can use on the character. I wouldn't I probably wouldn't bet on it. The best thing you probably could see for castorice is because again, this is very, very probably a carbon copy of the Acheron situation, where Acheron for the longest time really only had two options. It's Good Night and Sleep Well, and then the other option was her signature icon, which I do not have. But the thing is about Acheron is that later on, she ended up getting another light cone that was tailor-made for her, which is the Boundless Choreo, right? You get a crit rate increase, and you deal more damage to enemies that are slowed or have reduced defense. Now, obviously, later down the line, other characters that you use alongside her don't really have the debuffs for this, but Pela and Sora Wolf were really popular with this character back then, so having them in the same team alongside her allowed you to deal a ton of more damage with this light cone on, right? But this was a pay-to-win light cone because you only could get it from the banner, and you couldn't get it from the shop or anything like that, right? Again, this situation is very similar to Acheron's situation, and it's just greed. That's really all there is to it. The whole situation is greed, from the light cones to the relics to just how the character is kit-wise overall. Maybe we'll make a whole separate video going over how bad the situation actually really is from a everything perspective. But yeah, that's the biggest letdown I did see when it came to castorice, and realizing I have to farm a whole new relic set for a quantum character when this shouldn't have been the case from the get-go. Maybe they buff the quantum set later and it includes Member Sprite, but I don't see that happening because, funnily enough, the defense ignore you do get from the quantum set, which would have, guys, this would have been extremely valuable for castorice and her summon. I can't even preface how strong this would be for castorice and her summon. But to nerf this for castorice, right? Because obviously they want to sell you more solutions. They decided to allow the character to defense pen with her light cone. Because obviously you're not getting defense pen from the quantum set. You're just not going to. The quantum set would have definitely been a lot better, especially if you were using a free-to-play light cone or a battle pass light cone, and not having her signature, because you would have defense shred, and it would you wouldn't be missing out on just the defense shred from the light cone itself, right? And obviously, if you had both, you're double dipping into even more defense shred, which does stack and deals exponentially even more damage against enemies, right? But that just is not the case because of how castorice works. It's very disappointing. And, I mean, it's not even just a castorice thing, really. It's any character with summons. But let's be real, it was nerfed because of castorice. And now we know why it was nerfed. Because of castorice, right? The last thing I will mention is that tribbie does give resistance pen, right? And castorice gives resistance pen as well, right? And for the longest time, enemies in the Memory of Chaos, which if I can go to that really quickly, depending on the enemy you're fighting, you'll see the resistances they do have in this corner, right? Now, tribbie and castorice giving resistance pen, again, I'm congested, I apologize, means that the enemies you are fighting are going to be taking a ton of damage. And if we combine this with the true damage you are getting from Remember's main character, right? Which I actually did just unlock. I'll probably make a whole different video, by the way, on the story, because I think the story is so freaking good right now. Incredibly good. This is coming from someone who does not read stories ever, gacha games. I think the story right now is so freaking good. I really like it. I'm probably definitely going to continue it. after I finish this video and I upload it. But anyways, you'll find that castorice and tribbie are going to work really well together because you do have that double dip in the resistance pen for the characters, right? And as of right now, if we compare the amount of resistance pen you are getting from tribbie, which is a massive amount, the amount you are getting from tribbie and the amount you are getting from Robin, the amount you get from Robin for her E1 is on her E1, and it's the same amount as you get from tribbie on for her just her kit, right? So you are just getting that E1 Robin without pulling for E1 Robin. So she's gonna feel really good as an E0 character with castorice and any other character because of that resistance pen, right? But that's it. I'm too lazy to move around, so I'm just gonna stay here and let this be the outro. I don't really have anything else to say. Again, we'll probably have a Microsoft Paint for the quantum characters just because it is pretty much what we've always done. And I enjoy it. It just takes a while to just draw it out. And I don't feel like doing it today. So maybe I'll do it tomorrow or the weekend. We'll see. That's it. Let me know what you think, of course, of the upcoming quantum meta. I'm personally excited, even though, of course, this is a very disappointing time for Honkai Star in general, just because of the trajectory of the game and everything that's been going on surrounding castorice. Not even just castorice, but just the pay to win it feels like the game is right now. It's felt like this for a while, especially when you look at those Eidolon ones, the signature light cones, like the Acheron situation, right? History repeats itself with Star Rail, it feels like, you know? That's it. Thank you for watching, and have a nice rest of your day. I think I talked about everything in this video. Did I forget anything at all?